UDL in Action podcast wishes to acknowledge First Nations peoples in Australia and across the world whose songlines traverse the globe. We pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, whose cultural traditions inspire and continue to educate.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the UDL in Action podcast, where we explore inclusion, innovation, and the real-world impact of universal design for learning in classrooms of every kind. I'm your host, Rebecca Rosenberg, and I'm so glad you're tuning in for episode 4. Each episode, we respond to real questions from real educators, teachers and leaders who are designing for learner variability and rethinking what inclusive practice can look like. And of course, I'm joined again by my brilliant co-host, Rhonda Laswell from Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation in Indiana. Someone who brings wisdom and practical know-how to every episode. Rhonda, welcome back.
It's so good to see you again in chat. Thank you.
It's so lovely to see you again for episode 4. So, Rhonda, today our questions focus on the early years of learning. Here in Australia, that's Kindy to Year 2. So, students that are under 8 years of age, just so you know. Let's jump straight into our first question, which comes from Shell, a friend and passionate early years teacher. She asks, can you explain the difference between Montessori and universal design for learning? Does one feed into the other, especially from an early years perspective?
Absolutely. When you're thinking about universal design for learning, you're actually thinking about a framework for looking at entry points for students to be able to connect with content and to be
Yeah.
engaged, and then for opportunities to interact with that content, and then for opportunities to determine and show what they know. And so when we're looking at a Montessori model, that wouldn't be any different than looking at just a typical model or even a Reggio model that's based more in play. Regardless of whether it's a general ed, typical classroom, a Montessori, or something more play-based like Reggio, universal design for learning is not just content agnostic, but it is framework agnostic to how the classroom's set up. So perfect example of this, you have kiddos in a Montessori environment where they are driving the bus, so to speak, for themselves, right? But in that environment, leaning into UDL would be even super, super more important. And that's because if I have a kiddo who has an interest in a Montessori school, has a very high level interest in something that's like 3 or 4 grade levels above their reading ability, but they're really interested in that. Let's say it's something sciencey. That would be no different than a kiddo in a general ed classroom who might be reading 2 or 3 grade levels below, but would have an interest in a book and would want to know a content. Okay. So this kiddo is listening to reading, and this kiddo may be listening to reading, but they're listening for 2 totally different reasons. While one is listening because they may not have the vocab to completely read the book, and this one either. This one's below grade level and this one's above grade level. So when we think about Montessori, we're really wanting to give our students the ability to expand their knowledge in many different ways. And I would personally say that in a Montessori school, you could actually do more with UDL because you are setting yourself up for all of these different components for kiddos individually. Now, some might call that differentiated instruction, but if you're providing multiple access points and you're providing scaffolding, it doesn't matter if you're teaching in a Montessori environment or you're teaching in a regular typical environment.
Fantastic. That's such a great response. So it's really about the entry points and providing choice.
Absolutely, choice. But then also, too, at the end of the day, allowing students the opportunity to display and show what they know in more than one way as well.
Yes, fantastic, fantastic. I love it. Awesome. Thank you. That's such a wonderful, insightful answer. Okay, Rhonda, our next two questions come from a lady by the name of Katrina. She's an educational leader in Queensland and leads a large and diverse team focused on early years learning. So her first question is, why is UDL particularly important in the early years, that's K to 2, for fostering inclusive education?
Oh my goodness, for so many reasons. But one of the things that I have said often that I feel like we do, I know in the US, I'm not sure about in Australia, but I think any educational system struggles with this. We watch kiddos come in the door and be so excited about learning and creative little minds. And then over time, what do? We basically take them from coming in the door and being excited, and then we slowly put him in a system that says, okay, you track here, and we don't meet them where they are at the end of the day unless we are providing that opportunity, right? For them to all be able to learn to their full potential. And so the reason it is so absolutely important in the early years is that we want to foster that creativity, that excitement, that love of learning, but we also want to teach out of the gate our students how to learn. And a lot of times what we're teaching them is how to fill in the blank or how to sit in a row or how to walk in a line. I mean, and what should we be teaching? And what we should be teaching is how to learn. And so the other issue that I often hear from educators that plays into this as well is, well, how can little kiddos, direct their own learning? And it's actually quite amazing to watch little people be the architects of their own learning. They know what they need. And if they're given the appropriate environment and the opportunities and the choices and the scaffolding, they will blossom tremendously. And instead of us ending up with them being at all these different levels of understanding,
Mm,
by the time they get to grades, say 10, 11, 12, they're at all these different reading levels. We're actually bringing them in the door and we're giving them the ability to all, right, be successful if we do that out of the gate. And that's why it is so absolutely imperative in those younger years, because we're more than anything teaching them how to learn
that's
and love
fantastic.
learning and love
Yeah.
learning.
And want to be who they are when expressing what they know. So again,
Absolutely. And I even tell teachers who struggle in the upper grades, I say, you know what, if you're really struggling on how to picture what this needs to look like, go observe a kindergarten classroom and
mm,
think about what's there that you can bring into your environment. Just
yeah,
because we grow up doesn't mean we don't need word walls. We don't need things labeled.
we don't need provision of stationery, simple
Absolutely.
things that
Yes.
just couldn't be potential barriers. But when we provide those opportunities for students to overcome those barriers, no matter what year they're in, the shift in learner agency and students wanting to learn, it just grows substantially, which is wonderful. I love,
Right. And they're much more willing to take risks.
yes, yes. And I've heard people say, but what about, order and structure and control in the unit in the classroom? If we don't have those things in place, we don't have students coming in rows and sitting in rows and sitting in designated desks and chairs. What are your thoughts in regards to that?
Well, I always ask people, are you looking for compliance or are you looking for engagement? Because engaged students are actually very well behaved. And their conversations are on task, and they're going about learning in a creative way. And no one is saying that you don't teach students the structures and norms of society. I mean, those things have to be in place. You and I all get to pick what kind of car we're going to drive, but we have to follow the same rules of the road. And so that goes to speak with education as well. I mean, we certainly need to be respectful of others. But again, when you're learning how to learn and you're given opportunities to be the architect of your own learning and develop agency, you're actually in the end going to be more successful. And how many people go out into the employable world and all they do is sit in a row and walk in straight lines up and down the hallways at work? You know what I mean? It's like we need to model our classrooms after our society's workplaces, because that's where our kids are going to go. And we're no longer in the Industrial Revolution. We no longer need to try to, you know, spit out all these parts at the exact same time and the exact same type. We're moving into a much more creative space. And the one thing that I tell people too is that, would you as an adult want to do what you're asking your students to do for 5, 6 hours, 7 hours a day? And if not, how would you like it to be different?
Fantastic. That's an excellent quote to end that question from, Rhonda. So it again, it shifts the lens from being dogmatic about what we need to do
Mhm.
to, or task oriented, I should say, about what we need to do, because we as teachers are so task oriented, to how would I feel sitting in this classroom? That's
Mhm.
excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and the final question is, what are some specific examples of how teachers can provide multiple means of engagement for young learners?
Mm. There are just so many different ways to engage students. I think out of the gate, you always want to think about the senses:
Yeah.
sight, taste, smell, sound, touch. And the more opportunities that you can give students to use their senses, not only as part of the learning experience, but as part of that opening object lesson. So object lessons are fantastic. And then too, I always like to, especially as they start to get a little older, but even in the younger years, creating that cognitive dissonance. If you can show them something that doesn't line up with what they thought and get them to be, curious, um,
Mm.
that's always a lot of fun. But I think some practical, just the easiest, simplest practical examples are especially tuning into those senses. And then too, giving them just the chance to mess around with whatever it is you're learning or doing. Giving kiddos a little bit of time to experiment with what's going to be happening before you're actually like expecting them to, say, sit for a 10-minute, mini lesson. It's
Mhm.
really important that they get a little chance. Another easy thing to do is to do a little object lesson, then do a little teaching, then show something, and then do some more general instruction with the entire class. Because the more that you can chunk it into pieces and bites, the easier it is for them to also sustain um, the stamina that it takes to sit, and to listen. And with engagement too, you want to make sure that it's an interactive process
Yes.
and that you're also stating in advance what the expectations are for each activity. And so you're teaching those from the beginning of the school year throughout the course of the year. And that routine, the brain is most regulated when it knows what to expect and it has a routine. Now, that doesn't say within the routine you're not doing things that aren't fun and exciting and a little out of the norm. But what I'm saying is, if you want good engagement, have a set routine so they know at the opening of the lesson, we're going to have something like this. And then we're going to see an example, and then we're going to get to do something with it, and then we're going to maybe debrief together, so that that speaks back to the question you had a moment ago too, like what happens to rules and order. Well, there is an order to it, but within the order, they're given many opportunities to be actively participating in the learning versus sitting there and being little buckets to be filled, right? They're
Yes.
actually gardens,
Yes.
and they're not the watering can.
Mhm.
They're not getting something dumped into them. They're actually growing and
Yeah.
building those neurons. So the
Excellent.
senses are so important.
Yeah, excellent. That analogy is great too about the garden, and they are not the watering can. Can I ask, so you referred to an object lesson. Would you
Hmm.
be able to give an example of just how you would see that
Okay.
an object lesson and then going to the actual explicit instruction part and then allowing students to then explore what they're learning? Is there an example?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that we teach often, even at a very young age, are some basic scientific principles. And so something as simple as you're in the classroom and you're over in the corner and you spray maybe a little bit of a cinnamon air freshener, and you ask the students, as you can smell it in the room, stand up. And you're going to have kids on one side of the room near it stand up, and then slowly across the room, what's going to happen? They're going to slowly stand up. And so then once you do that, you can draw on a whiteboard or on the LCD something that looks much like molecules, right? That are close together and then spreading out. And so you can simply show them with a visual, but also with the ability to smell, and then you're reinforcing that, and they're actually able to experience it and then see it.
Fantastic, fantastic. And then how would you then enable kids to explore more of that topic that you're teaching about molecules? What would come to mind, particularly in regards to choice, as to how they could learn more independently in regards to that?
Well, there are lots of things you could do with water and food coloring. For
Uh-huh.
example, the colder the water, the less likely it's going to be to spread out right into the substance. The warmer the water, the more that it is. So they could experiment with some food coloring and different colors of water for sure. Um, I always like to ask them too a question. So for me personally, at the beginning of all that, I'd be like, okay, what are some of your favorite memories associated with the smell of something? Right. And they're going to come up with maybe the smell of cookies at the holidays, or the smell of summer, or the rain. And that's kind of the entry point into that. Right. And then
Ah,
once you've got them hooked and they're talking about something they've experienced themselves,
yes.
then you can go to the object lesson, then you can do the diagram, and then they can go into stations where they have the opportunity then to experiment with that. They can draw it, right? They can draw an example of something. And so that they can visualize the fact that when I smell something, there are molecules in the air, even though I can't see them, right? That are waffling and floating to me. And so grains of sand, putting something in water and stirring it. I mean, there are just so many different ways that, and then at a station, you could have a video showing and explaining this. And then at another station, you can ask them to draw it. And when it comes time to assess their understanding, then you could have them draw a picture, you could have them write a sentence, you could have them tell you, because really all you're asking them for, right, is to explain what's happening in that process.
So you could give them the choice. They can
Absolutely.
choose how they want to tell you what they know. I love that example. Thank you so much.
Uh-huh.
Your examples are so insightful, and the way you describe them, I can literally see the classroom come to life at this new topic that they're learning. That's wonderful, wonderful.
And
Thank
everybody's engaged. You're not going to have anyone not stand up. I mean, they're all like waiting to smell it.
Of course, of course. What a wonderful hook. What a wonderful draw card. Yeah, great example. Thank you. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
So many great examples today, Rhonda. But before we wrap up, as per our other episodes, can I ask what's one takeaway you'd love our listeners to walk away with today?
So when I think back to what we talked about with our Montessori and what we talked about with our littles and with engagement, I think as long as you are thinking about being biologically respectful to every student, and what I mean by that is you're biologically respectful of their brains and where their brains are. And so when you do that, you are meeting them where they are, and you can bring everybody else along then at that point. But I always say, if you were to go into a classroom, let's say grade 2, and you wanted to ask them all to try out to run around a track, and
Yes.
you gave them all the exact same size of shoe, would you be able to assess who the fastest runner was in the group?
Mhm.
No. So you wouldn't be biologically respectful to the kiddo's shoe size. We have to do the same thing with their brains.
Excellent. Excellent. Again, another wonderful analogy for us to take away today. That's excellent. So well said. A big thank you to Shell and Katrina for their insightful questions, and thank you to all of you listening and leading this important work. If today's episode sparked ideas or reflections, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at udl.in.action.podcast@gmail.com. And if you'd like the show notes or resources mentioned, please just get in touch. It's just no problem at all. So until next time, keep designing for possibility and not predictability. This has been the UDL in Action podcast. Subscribe, share, and keep the conversation going. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Toodaloo.